So today I'm going to be talking about e-scouting whitetail property. There's almost an endless number of reasons why you would need to e-scout a property. One of the big reasons is, for me, I'm fortunate to be able to travel a lot, and a lot of these properties that I do hunt are a long ways from my house. So being able to utilize the computer and utilize the resources that we all have available to us online to learn as much as I can about any given property is vital for my success when I eventually do step foot on that property. I'm not going to really focus on how we got the property. We're just going to assume that you have done your due diligence. You've been lucky enough to get your hands on a property, and now it's about zeroing in on getting a mature whitetail in front of you within archery range is what we're going to be focusing on today. Please hit that like and subscribe button. I know you get asked a million times to do it. It helps us with our natural reach in the algorithm itself. So hit that like, hit that subscribe. If you like what we do, please let us know in the comments below. Let's get into the video. So the resources that we're going to be primarily using is Google Earth. It's available to everyone. You can get it on your phone, you can get it on your computer. And then we're also going to dive into MyTopo for a little bit on a couple different pieces of property. So the first thing that I do is I want to find the overall theme of the property. And what I mean by that is I want to know how the deer are moving throughout the property in relationship to the other properties, as well as trying to find, the very first thing that I do is try to find the food. And what the food is going to tell me is how the deer are moving in the evenings and how the deer are moving from the mornings, because in general, deer move from food to bed in the mornings and from bed to food in the evenings. One other important thing to note when looking at this property is determining when you're most likely to hunt this property. Generally speaking, early season and late season, you would treat it the same. So you're looking at food sources, and primarily I would be focused on the food sources in the evenings to try to get deer in front of me. And then during the rut, you're focused on pinch points. And we're going to cover pretty much all that right now. But knowing that going into it, if I'm only hunting the rut on a particular property, I'm not so concerned about certain aspects like food. I'm really trying to find bedding areas and pinch points in between those bedding areas. And, obviously, if I know a food source, pinch points coming from bedding to food is always critical too. So let's take this particular piece of property. This is in central Kansas. It's a property I'm actually pretty familiar with. But if I'm gonna get the overall arc of this farm, I want to see how it lays next to the farms that are surrounding it. So as you can tell, it's very open. This particular part of the country is very open, and it looks like there isn't a whole lot of cover all the way around it. It's a lot of crop fields to the south, a lot of crop fields to the north. There's a nice creek that goes through, a lot of timber along the creek. So on this piece of property, as far as how it relates to the other properties, deer are going to be moving generally east and west direction because they're going to be following this creek, whether they're doing that during the rut or they're doing that during early season or late season. The next thing that I like to look for is food. So on this particular property, this is in farm country in central Kansas, there's a lot of food available. And there's food all on the north side, not just on our property right here, but on the neighboring property. Literally everywhere there's food. On the south side of the creek, the same exact thing. Over here on the neighbors, all food. Over here on us, all food. Everything is food that is not on the creek itself. Now, one thing that I would love to identify, which you cannot do from the air, is what crops are what. So obviously this field in the south is some type of crop field, this field to the north is some type of crop field. Well, any given year, this could be corn, any given year this could be corn, and this could be beans, and this could be beans, and then it could be turned into wheat later, in the fall after they harvest. This particular part of the country, it's either going to be corn, beans, or wheat. Knowing what crops are where is really important because it's going to dictate how I hunt a particular spot because, for instance, soybeans, if I'm going to hunt this farm early season, soybeans can be a big draw as long as the beans are still green. But once those beans start turning, they become less of a draw to a deer, and they start shifting, they start shifting their feeding patterns to somewhere else. Vice versa, corn early season is not particularly a great draw. I'm not going to hunt a standing cornfield in September. Almost very, very seldom have I done that. But as soon as that matures, the corn matures, and then once the farmers harvest it in particular, there's corn all over the ground. It becomes a major, major draw. So once those, it just depends on whether the farmer harvests it in September, October, November, depends on what the weather's doing. But knowing that, let's just say the south side of this is a cornfield, knowing that's a cornfield, well, I'm not really going to focus on that in September. I might focus on that in October and November once it's cut. Hopefully it gets cut, depending on the weather. Okay, we're going to make another trip down south here. So the next property that we're going to take a look at is a property that's all timber. This is going to be very common for people in the northeast, eastern half, southeastern part of the country. This property in particular is a property that I'm familiar with. It's in southeastern Oklahoma. It's a place that I've had some experience with before, but before I ever stepped foot on this property, I was in Google Earth doing exactly what I'm about to relay to you guys. Okay, so first thing that we look for, even if it's timber, is I try to identify food. Now, on a piece of property that's all timber, that's a lot harder. So what would I look for if I was looking for food on a timbered property? And the first thing I look for is anywhere that sunlight can hit the ground. And so this is in southeastern Oklahoma. I'm zooming way out right here. And this is the property that we have to hunt. This is the closest field, and let's look, the center of the property to this field is about 2.5 miles. So that's not really in play there. So now I'll go a little more in depth on the property in particular. As you can see, there's an oil well that has a pretty good opening on it, quite frankly. I would focus on this. There's going to be a lot of forage, natural forage for deer in the field itself, as well as on the edge where more sunlight is allowed to hit the ground, and different types of vegetations are going to grow up there as opposed to in this timber. I'd go along the ridge tops here, which I'll identify here in a second how I know that's a ridge top. And there's small openings along this little ridge road. So I would when I did get boots on the ground, I would concentrate on looking for just food along that. I'm going to assume that there's food in these openings that are not available in the timber, because the amount of sunlight that can reach the ground in these openings on these ridge tops along these roads is much greater than in the timber. So the next thing that I'm going to look for is hardwoods. So in the southeast, really most of the country, oak trees are a big draw for food. So if you're looking at this, you can see the difference. This photo was taken in January of 2020, which is a very recent photo actually. You can tell that this right here, you can tell that this spot right here is hardwoods. How do we know that? Because there aren't any leaves on the tree. So this was taken in January. All the leaves has fallen off of hardwoods. You can see on the east of it, all green, which is pine trees. West of it, all green, which is pine trees. So there's definitely going to be oak trees that are scattered amongst these pines on both sides of this, but I'm going to play the odds and say that the most producing oak trees are going to be in this big oak flat right here in the middle of the property that we have to hunt. Now, mind you, this is all from the air. This is all from, 20,000 miles up in the air taken from a satellite. But it does allow us to at least gauge and make a determination. Is something that we can focus on whenever we actually do step foot on the property and really focus our effort and our time and be efficient while we're on there instead of just blindly walking around. The next thing that I look for is cover. Here in the timber country, it's very hard to determine what is bedding and what isn't, because it all looks like bedding essentially. One thing that we can do to kind of narrow this down is you can tell that the stem density in this particular spot, this particular spot over here, as opposed to the surrounding areas, is much higher. So stem density is going to tell me, you know, frankly, the amount of cover that is there. So the more trees there are per square foot, the more cover. This looks like a immature pine thicket, is what it looks like. So I would imagine that this is very thick in here. I would also imagine that there's a lot of deer bedding on this little ridge right here, as well as the side ridge right here. So that's what I would focus on, is bedding. And obviously, quite frankly, the whole property looks like bedding. So now that we know what's bedding and what's food, now we can determine general movement. And in timber country, it's very, very, very hard. The deer are going to be on this particular property are going to be moving like, you know, they're going to be moving from here to here, from here to here, to here to here. I mean, they're just going to be moving all over the place, which definitely makes it hard. Let's go back up to the farm country property. So farm country is a lot easier. We know that there's food to the north, there's food to the south. The bedding in farm country is going to be generally one of two things, actually one of three things really. It's going to be timber. Obviously, is always a good go-to when it comes to farm country. So along this creek bottom is a great example of cover. So there's going to be deer bedding in that timber for sure. The next thing is any kind of CRP. So one thing you can't tell from this particular photo is whether or not anything's in CRP. You can tell right here. There's kind of a little cutout of the actual crop field. So this little spot right here. That right there is going to be grown up grass, so that could be some cover. You really can't tell from this photo whether or not there's any CRP on here, but CRP is always a good bedding spot, especially in open country. And then the next thing is the crops themselves. So especially early season, corn is definitely... Anytime corn is standing, corn is going to be a bedding location. And it's hard to, if this whole south end of this property is in corn, we have to just assume that there's a bunch of deer bedding in that corn as well as in the creek bottom. So maybe this north half is beans and this south half is corn. We're not going to be able to tell this until we set foot on it, but we're going to assume that if the corn is standing, then that's going to be bedding. And we're going to play our wind accordingly from that. Now that we know where the bedding is, so we're just going to, so again, we're not going to be able to tell on this particular farm what is corn, what is beans, what's, you know, whatever type of crop rotation they have for that year. That will be determined once we step foot on the property. But let's just say it's all beans. We know that the general movement is going to be from the bedding to the fields in the morning. So we're going to say, on this particular farm, the deer are going to be coming from the creek, going north to the north field in the evenings, and then south from the creek to the south fields in the evenings. So deer movement's going to be going like this in the evenings, and like this in the mornings, and then like this in the evenings, and like this in the mornings. Okay. So if I'm hunting this early season or late season, I'm wanting to hunt on the food sources, quite frankly, in the evenings. So on this particular farm, I'd be hunting. So corners are really always good spots. You can tell right here in this corner, you can actually tell in this corner where the animal traffic has ate down the crops quite a bit, and same thing with this corner. So I would focus heavily on this corner and right here, and this other little kind of bend in the trees, for an early and late season spot, because it looks like that's a natural place for the deer to come out and feed. Okay. But the next thing I want to do is I want to look for pinch points. Now, one neat feature on Google Earth is the ability to go back in time and look at a particular property from different years. So on this one, I know that there's a creek in there. You can actually see the water amongst the treetops there, but this photo was taken in June. So it's really hard to see the actual path of the creek, which is going to be very important when it comes to determining any kind of pinch point. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to hit this little button right up here called Show Historic Imagery. Okay, so I hit the button, gives us a timeline. You can see the little notches on there. Those are different photos taken at different times on a timeline. So right here, it's 5/20. This is while I'm recording. This is May 2020. We're gonna go back to 2019. Let's see when that photo was taken. Okay, there's a photo from 15. Doesn't really reveal much more. 2011 doesn't really reveal much more. 10, not much. 8, not much. All these photos were taken in the summer, which is very unfortunate. I like photos that were taken in the wintertime when the leaves are gone. 2004, not much. 2003, not much. Okay, so now this is April 2003. This is right before green up. It's a little bit, let's see what this next one is. 2003. Okay, we just went back in time 30 years almost to 1991. Now, obviously it's changed a lot in 30 years, but the path of the creek is going to be pretty darn similar. So we're going to use this to determine any pinch points. A pinch point is any spot that bends different deer trails into one spot. It pinches them down. And so there's a lot of things that can cause this, and you've probably heard all of these, different types of funnels, pinch points, bends inside corners. There's a lot of different things. So what I'm looking at here is I'm looking at the creek. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna look at the low-hanging fruit, so to speak. I'm gonna look for the creek. I'm gonna look for pinches where the creek bends close to a field edge. Deer are lazy, and so right here we're gonna follow the creek. Ooh. Boom, this is a perfect spot right here. If you go to the ruler, we go here to yards. We measure from the edge of the creek to the edge of that's feet. We go from the edge of the creek to the edge of the timber. It looks like it's about 40, almost about 50 yards. That's perfect. So we know that any trail that's moving along this creek is going to come up around this creek edge. We know that any trail that's coming from up here is going to come on. Any trail that's coming from all the way up here is gonna. They're all going to bend at that one spot. So what I'd be looking for is one of two things. I might be looking for something close to the field edge and then playing my wind blowing out. And I also might be playing something right on the creek edge with my wind blowing over the creek. Especially if I can come in from the south side of the creek. So what I'll do if I'm scouting there is I'll drop a pin there. And I might drop one, and then I'll put, creek funnel on it. Okay, so then once I step foot on the property, that will be one of the first places that I go to look and try to find a stand location. Okay, so we'll keep going along the creek so it gets wide again here. I would be looking through all this, and maybe there's a better spot right here than there is right here. Essentially gonna give me the same thing. One thing that screams out right here is, again, you got to remember this particular photo is 30 years old, but one thing that screams out is this spot right here. You got the creek running north and south. You got a fence line, it looks like, running east and west. And I bet, yeah, so even 30 years later, the fence line to the west is gone, but the one to the east is still there. So I want to be focusing on this because deer are going to move up and down this creek, and they're also going to be moving up and down this fence line right here. So deer are like us in the fact that they're lazy, and they will walk around something and they will walk along edges while doing it. And obviously an edge of a field is an easy edge to spot. We'll go over some other edges when we get to the timber here in a second, but I'm gonna drop a pin right here because I want to look at it. I want to look at this spot. And we'll drop that. We'll say that's 2. Name it 2. We can name it fence line. Okay. We might go over here. This is the same spot. So see how this makes a bend? This would be something that I'd want to focus on because all these trails that are on the south side of this creek are going to come around this bend. They're all going to come like this. and anything wanting to go out into this field are going to come out right here on this corner. So I would actually even focus on maybe these trees right here. So we'll do 3, put west side. All right. So these are 3 spots that I would look for on this particular piece of property. All right, let's go to the property down south in the timber. Okay, so timber is definitely harder to find edges, but you can do it. Just like I said a while ago, deer like to travel edges. And edges doesn't have to be an edge of a crop field next to timber. An edge can also be different types of vegetation meeting other types of vegetation. And in this particular case, I'm talking about pine thickets and pine trees meeting hardwoods. So as you can tell, this property has some pretty clearly defined edges, and that's because this particular property was clear-cutted 20 years ago. So again, we're going to go to the historical images. This is the current image that we're looking at. We go back in time. This is 2015. You can see the edges starting to pop up a little bit. So, and what I mean by that is you can actually look right here. You see this nice clean edge right here running north and south. Deer are going to walk up and down that edge. It's a natural spot for them. It's a natural border. It's a natural landmark for them to be walking up and down. So deer will be moving up and down this. They will be moving up and down this edge. Any other edges we might find, they'll be moving up and down. And the same with roads. I mean, just as if you were walking through the timber and you stumbled across a road, you would probably walk that road because why? Why would you walk that road? Because it's easier. Deer are the same way. So all these little trails that are amongst this property, those are going to end up being trails too, because deer by nature are lazy and they're going to use those the same as you and I would. So one thing that I like to do once I actually get on the ground is I like to visualize how I would move through a particular spot, through a particular piece of timber, through a particular piece of anywhere that I'm at. And generally speaking, the deer are going to do the same thing because they're very simple in nature, as are we. So it's just, if you followed your own gut instinct, then you'll be doing pretty good to find some natural deer trails. All right, let's keep going back in time here. So now we're getting into some green photos. This is right after right after green up here. You see the property getting more and more open the further back in time we go, and that's because this particular property was clear cut a long time ago. You go back to the earliest photo available, which is in 1995. You can see really hard cut lines that they had just recently came in here and cut, the timber out of it, and they went along the property lines. That's why there's straight lines in the timber. So, knowing that, what I would actually do is I'm gonna drop a few more pins, areas that I want to concentrate on. Okay, you can see these lines really easily in these old photos. So I want to drop, frankly, this edge right here is very, very appealing to me because, like I said, these deer will be moving up and down this. So I want to drop a pin right here. I'm going to say 1, pine edge. Deer are going to be moving up and down this big time during the rut, looking for does. Like I said, deer just like to travel edges. Here's another one down here. This looks like a corner, really. So deer are gonna bend around this corner because deer are lazy. So I'm gonna do right here. I'm gonna put 2 pine corner. All right, I'm just giving them little names just for reference. It looks like a creek edge. Okay, so the very next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to look for terrain. So we're going to get out of the historical data. Now, one cool thing about Google Earth is it shows you the terrain, right? It allows you to look at the hills and the mountains in this particular case. Okay, so one thing I can tell from this particular photo is in finding the terrain and finding topo maps is not really going to be relevant in all cases. On the farm that we was just looking at in Kansas, it's flat as, you know, a pool table. So there's really not any sense of looking at a topo map. You're really looking at edges of vegetation, crop rotation. You're looking for things that are growing out of the ground to dictate where you're going to hang. You're not necessarily looking for the ground itself. On this property, you're definitely looking at the terrain. So from the air, it looks like it's just, obviously it looks like it's just flat. Of course, when we actually get down to it, we know that that is not the case. So you can see that there's a big ridge right here. You can see that there's a ridge right here. And you can see there's a ridge right here with a steep drop off going here next to another big ridge. Okay, so the bottom of these are, they're traps. The bottom of these are absolute traps when it comes to hunting whitetails. I'll show you why. If I go up here to, let's go up here. We're just going to go across this property. If I go up here to the ruler tool, okay, we go to path. If I click on the north end of our property, right here, and I go to the south end of our property, which is right here, okay, I have show elevation profile selected, okay. So what this does is this allows you to literally, like you're taking a slice of your property and you can see right into the slice. So if we go up to the north here, you can follow the cursor down here on the profile itself, or you can see it up here on the map with this little arrow. Okay, so right here, we're right around 1,600 feet. We go down to just over 1,200 feet. So that's almost a 400-foot drop. That's a pretty good size hill. So we go back up to around about 100-foot rise, falls back down 50, 60 feet, rises back up, drops back down, goes back up. Let me show you why that's important. Let's go back to the ruler. We're going to start right here, and we're just going to make a little smaller one so I can give you a good example of what it looks like. Okay. Okay, let me show you why. So let's just say we were trying to hang a stand right here, okay? The reason why this is the trap, I'm going to do a little graphic here for you. We're going to pretend we have a stand right here on this bottom. There will be, 100% will be gobs and gobs of deer sign here. You will want to hang down here because this will be where the most deer sign is. It looks like there's a creek there. There's probably a drainage, like a big drainage creek. It's probably going to be a seasonal creek. At that, there will be rubs, there will be scrapes, there will be tracks, there will be every possible sign that you could possibly ask for will be there. Here's why you don't want to hunt there. If you hang a stand right here and you have a prevailing wind that's blowing, let's say it's coming from this way, let's say it's coming from the south, and it's blowing over this small ridge right above you. What's happening is areas, this is physics, areas of high pressure want to move to areas of low pressure. So the wind's blowing up over you, over this ridge. Well, what that does is that creates a bubble of low pressure, which is what you're in. And so what happens is that wind swirls around, and it literally just makes a swirl with your wind in it. And that is not what we want whenever we're hunting, you know, with a bow and arrow in particular. Now, the only way that I would hunt this bottom, any kind of bottom like this, is if I was hunting a wind that was moving up and down the creek and I was just straight up giving away one direction of the creek or the other. So let's just say I was hunting, so this particular creek's running east and west. Let's just say I'm going to give up. I'm coming in from the east. You know, I'm coming in from the east right here. I'm going to give up that side. So if I hunt it with a straight west wind blowing in my face, during the rut, catching deer moving up and down that creek bottom looking for love. That could work. Yeah, I'm giving up everything back behind me where I came from, but I'm picking my poison, so to speak. So if I have a wind blowing up and down that's going to work, right? The wind's not going to be swirling in that case. Now I'm going to booger deer up that are coming from, you know, that direction, but you got to pick your poison at some point. Now, one thing you can look for, this is the same property on a topo map, and you can read, I can read a topo map, you know, really well, but in my opinion, you know, using Google Earth really is a much simpler and much more visual way of looking at the terrain. And it's a lot easier sometimes to dictate major changes in the terrain. So, but topo maps are very useful in a lot of cases. And this property has, you know, some pretty good elevation changes. So we look at this property. This is the ridge that we were looking at a while ago. You can see the top of it's just over 1,600 feet and drops down to this creek bottom. Everything falls going, in this case, westerly. You got a pretty nice flat ridge right here. You got a pretty nice flat ridge right here, going up to just really, quite frankly, quite a steep mountain. So if you look right here, the bottom, the big dark ridge right here, or line right here is 1,200 feet. So 1,200 feet, going all the way up to 1,900 feet. That's a 700-foot hill over a pretty short period. That's a pretty good sized mountain. I would not want to hunt this hillside unless, let's say, for instance, this is my only property that I can hunt. Well, if this is my only section of the farm that I can hunt, and say this is all I got, then just like I was talking about a while ago, I would try to avoid hunting it with, in this case, north-south winds. I would try to hunt it with east-west winds, because any kind of north-south wind is going to be a very, very swirly wind. If I was hunting it with east-west winds, I would focus on these little drainages. Now, this is where a topo map is really effective, because you're not able to see these small, these small little drains on Google Earth. It's a lot harder to see, but here you can see them quite easily. So I would focus on these. So I would go and try to scout these and see if there's any trails going up these, because like we talked about earlier, deer are lazy just like us. They're going to be going up and down these drains because those drains are more shallow. They've been washed out over the years, and so the grade going up them is more shallow. And it's also a reference in the timber. So you walk over and then, oh, there's that drainage. I know where I'm at. And then they go up and then go to the next landmark. So if I was hunting prevailing, let's say we're hunting a west wind, and, let's just use one of these steep ones for an example. I might look for trails on the east side of this drain and hunt with a west wind, blowing alongside this ridge, and vice versa. If I was trying to hunt an east wind, I might hunt over here, hunt on this side of the drain, hunting with an east wind. But for the most part, we can tell a lot of this from Google Earth with the terrain feature. So we know there's a main ridge here. We know there's a main ridge here. They all dump down to a creek right here, which will be obviously where these two creeks meet is going to be a convergence of trails. So we're going to want to drop a pin right there. We can't do it in this particular app, but this is mytopo.com. But we want to drop a pin right there and see if we can, find a stand location, because there will be deer that a lot of trails are going to converge in that spot. You're going to have to watch the wind, though, if you're hunting down there in the bottom. What I would do on this property is I would focus on the ridge tops themselves. If baiting is legal where you are, where you're from, and where you hunt, using these ridge to set stand locations and then trying to pull them deer up to you is definitely an option. If baiting is not legal or you don't want to bait, find, small openings like this. Let's see how this particular opening is almost 60 yards long and 30 yards wide. That's a perfect killing plot. This would be a great spot to plant a food plot, and that would be like a, you know, it would draw them deer to that one spot. It's right next to a real steep ridge. That would be a spot that I would focus on right there. I would drop a pin right here where these creeks meet and look for a stand location to see if we could get one. So I'll do 3 creek meet. And then whenever I actually step foot on the ground, these pins are the first place that I go to try to determine what to look for. But I would focus on these ridges because these 2-track trails, which are actually, you know, probably, you know, 4-wheeler trails and stuff, are going to be trails for these deer. These deer are going to be moving up and down that for the main reason that it's easier than walking through the timber. So I would be focusing on the ridge tops because I know that the wind is going to be more consistent up there. And during the rut on this particular farm, I would be hunting, you know, I might be hunting on the south side of this trail with the north wind, try to catch the deer going east and west. And if I had a south wind, I'd hunt on the north end of this road and try to catch the deer, you know, walking in front of me up and down the road. And, you know, using these, you can see these, there's several tracks like this. I would be focusing on those because I know those are going to be trails that deer are going to be walking up and down. So e-scouting is not exact science. All you can do is the best you can with the resources you have. Now, Google Earth is a phenomenal resource. It gives you ability to go back in time, to look at old photos, look how vegetation has changed over the years. But it doesn't allow you to see how thick that timber is right there. It doesn't allow you to see if it's bedding or if it's big mature pine or big mature hardwoods at the moment. It doesn't allow you to see if a particular field is soybeans, corn, CRP at any given point in time. You use this, you use these pins, you use all this time that you put in here. That way, when you step foot on the property, your time is used more efficiently. And that's what I do. That's my normal. This is my normal routine whenever I get a new piece of property, or I'm trying to learn more about the property that I've maybe hunted for years. Take a step back and look at, you know, the big picture. The biggest things to take away from what I do for e-scouting is get the overall picture. How are deer moving in a relationship from my property to the surrounding properties? Find the food and the bedding, because that will give me movement in the mornings and the evenings. And then from there, try to find the pinch points. So generally during the rut, you're going to hunt the pinch points. You're going to try to catch, you know, bucks that are moving, right? And these pinch points are areas where, you know, those trails are getting pinched down. And so that increases your chances of a mature buck walking in front of you. In the early season and late season, I might be focusing more on the food sources themselves, right on the field edges, areas that I can see a long ways, figure out how the deer are coming into a field or leaving a field, and then maybe move in from there. If I have 5 days to hunt early season or late season, I'm spending 3 of those days scouting, 100%, because knowing what those deer are doing from a distance is way more valuable than going in and boogering something up the first day because you think you know what's going on. But as far as e-scouting goes, overall picture, find the food, find the bedding, find the pinch points, and then now it's all about getting boots on the ground and, you know, doing the actual sweat equity involved when it comes to, you know, getting a big mature buck in front of you. So, hey, thanks for watching. We truly appreciate it. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them right in the comments below, or go to myworldoutdoors.com and, you know, email us.